He knew precisely what I meant. It was perfectly clear when I told her, I'm an open book. Everybody knows me. If you've ever made any of those statements or similar types of statements and then discovered your message wasn't received as it was intended, or it was completely misunderstood, or maybe they didn't see you in the way that you saw yourself, then you've fallen victim to the transparency illusion. The transparency illusion tricks us into believing we are more straightforward than we are. And it's just one reason for misunderstandings that Heidi Grant-Halvorson explores in her book, No One Understands You and What You Can Do About It. This is the latest in my series of 10 books every change leader needs to read. Stay tuned. I'm going to share with you why this is a must-read book for you and every change leader, and what you can do to reduce the chance for miscommunications and misunderstandings. Welcome back to the channel. Communication is one of the most challenging, yet it is an essential element for enabling organizational change. It's challenging because in addition to defining what to communicate to whom and when, you also struggle to ensure that your intended message is received and interpreted as it is intended. In this book, Halvorson, a social psychologist, argues that there is almost always a gap between how we perceive ourselves, how others perceive us, what we think we have communicated, and what others have interpreted. Our lack of awareness of this gap, coupled with the belief that we see others objectively and vice versa, is what leads to the miscommunication and often very flawed decision-making. It's one reason with our clients, we advocate that they check in to see if what they intended to communicate is what was received and if it was interpreted as intended. Our perceptions aren't rational. How we perceive ourselves and others and how we are perceived is not a rational process. It's biased, incomplete, inflexible, and largely, but not entirely, unconscious. As Halvorson states, the good news is that although our intuition of how others see us is often inaccurate, it is predictable. That when you understand the biases and the rules, you can, when needed, alter your words, your actions to ensure that you are perceived as you intended to be. We often get how others perceive us and our perceptions of others wrong because we're working based on two very flawed assumptions. The first assumption, that other people see you objectively as you are. They don't. And neither do you see people objectively as they are. All of your words, actions, body language, and facial expressions are open to interpretation. And we are much harder to read than we think we are. Your frustrated face may look the same as your angry face or your intently listening face. Your arms folded could mean you're blocking information and closing yourself off. Or it could mean you're cold because you're sitting underneath the air conditioning vent. Several years ago, I was conversing with one of my team members about a problem that she was trying to solve. And it was a big concern for her. And I was listening intently to understand her concerns, the possible solutions, and the problem. When she stopped mid-sentence and said, "Are you angry with me?" I was like, "No. What makes you think I'm angry?" And she said, "Well, it's the look on your face and the fact that you haven't said anything." That's when I recognized that my intently listening face can look the same as an angry face. Write in the comment section if you've ever had a facial expression or maybe body language misinterpreted, and what was the result of that misinterpretation. The risk of miscommunication and inaccurate understanding is further exacerbated because our brain prioritizes speed over accuracy. And to gain that speed, to assess a situation quickly, we rely on cognitive shortcuts such as assumptions, general rules, and categorizations. These shortcuts can be helpful. They're often the basis for our first impressions of a person or group. However, if you do not take the time to consciously reassess and challenge those assumptions or rules, they can lead to serious misunderstandings and harm your change efforts. One example, the primacy effect. That is the tendency to give too much weight to our initial impressions of a person or a group. And this has big implications for your change efforts because, as Halvorson states, we base our future expectations and perceptions of someone on our initial impression. As a result, we can limit the potential of the individual to change. And the same thing is done to you. Halvorson powerfully illustrates this by using the example of two children completing a math test. Each test section was equal in terms of number of questions, complexity, and required skills. The overall scores for each child, identical. However, the boy scored higher in the first half of the test, and the girl scored higher in the second half. Rationally, they're equal in ability. However, because of the primacy effect, the boy who scored higher on the first half of the test and lower on the second half is perceived as more talented, even by expert math teachers. I see a similar phenomenon with long-term versus new employees when leaders are working with a resistant mindset. The leader introduces a change. New employees who don't ask many questions or challenge the change are perceived as accepting it. Long-term employees who ask many questions and maybe remind the leader of similar but failed changes that occurred in the past are perceived as resistant to it. However, when it comes to adoption, the rate of adoption for long-term and new employees is about the same. Categorization is another automatic and often unconscious shortcut that can lead to misunderstanding and miscommunication. Categorization is an innate and necessary human function. We simply wouldn't survive if we had to figure out what something was, whether it was safe, and what to do with it every time we encountered it or something similar to it. Could you imagine walking into a room and there are 3 different types of chairs? One you've seen before, but the other 2 you've never seen before, and not knowing what those other 2 were and what to do with them. As necessary as categorization is for our survival, our beliefs about the categories, aka stereotypes, that's where those come from, can lead to many erroneous conclusions about situations and people, especially when the qualities we want to portray don't coexist with the category or the stereotype. Again, Halvorson gives such a great example around creativity and leadership. Most people say, we want a leader who's innovative, can generate new solutions, and thinks outside the box. Research supports the idea that creative leaders are better able to affect change. Yet that's not what happens in reality. Research has shown it's more likely that the creative person won't be given the leadership position. That's because our image of a creative person is at odds with our image of a leader. One study that asked employees to rate their coworker's solution to a problem for creativity, how new and novel it was, and evidence of leadership, found that the more creative the solution, the less effective they believed that person would be as a leader. As Halvorson states, although creativity is a much admired quality, because of the unconscious bias, organizations believing they are picking people with clear leadership potential may inadvertently assign leadership to people who lack creativity and will only maintain the status quo, believing they are picking people with clear leadership potential. Most people don't use stereotypes because they consciously believe them. They use them unconsciously because the human brain is hardwired to categorize everything, including people, in an effort to understand and interpret our environment and the information that it is receiving. That's why it's so essential to become consciously aware of the assumptions, biases that you're making, and disconnect from that automatic phase 1 perception and consciously activate the more thoughtful and accurate phase 2 perception. Phase 2 perception emphasizes accuracy over speed. And Halvorson distinguishes between the automatic, unconscious, and biased phase 1 perception, which lacks context, and the accurate and thoughtful phase 2 perception. When you engage in phase 2 perception, you consider context. You strive for some understanding. Consider alternative interpretations of a person or group's words and actions, improving communication and understanding. You get a more accurate and objective understanding of the person or group. Phase 1 is the default mode for every human being. So the ability to activate phase 2 perception quickly and with less effort makes a difference. And that's core to our work with leaders to help them use the readiness mindset. When we show leaders and enable them to use the readiness mindset, we show them how to adopt techniques, reframe, ask different questions to disconnect from that automatic and often erroneous judgments of phase 1 perceptions and connect quickly and easily to phase 2 perceptions. Thus, they create a more accurate picture of their team's response to change and can prevent resistance. I've already said that Halvorson's most significant observation about perception is that it's not a completely rational process. Even phase 2 perception, when it is activated, is done within the context of the perceiver. That context acts like a lens or a filter through which you are seen and the way you see others. She talks about 3 of the most notable. 3 of the most notable are trust, power, and ego. Halvorson notes that understanding how these filters are influencing one's own and others' perception increases your chance of being understood as you intended and of you understanding others as they intended. This book is one of my favorites for understanding the potential of misunderstandings and miscommunication. It offers excellent insight into why we're often misunderstood or we're misunderstanding others. The importance of recognizing and addressing our unconscious biases, assumptions, and challenging them in order to get a clearer and deeper picture of what's happening within your organization and with the people that you're interacting with. Let me know if you've read this book and what your biggest takeaway was. That's it for now. I hope you found this helpful. I'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.